Daland promises his daughter in marriage to the Dutchman, and the two ships set sail, favored by the south wind. And thus ends Act One of the Madison Opera production of The Flying Dutchman by Wagner. Bradley Garvin sang the role of the Dutchman. Dean Peterson was Daland. We'll be back with Acts 2 and 3 in just a few minutes, but first a chat with some of the important players in the April 2010 production of Flying Dutchman. I'm Cheryl Dring, and during production week I had a chance to sit down with conductor John DeMaine, General Director Alan Naplin, and soprano Turid Karlson. She's our Zenta for this production, and we'll be hearing her in Act 2. Alan, first of all, this is the first, not only first Flying Dutchman, but the first Wagner that Madison Opera has undertaken. Tell me about how that happened.
That's correct. Madison Opera is celebrating its 49th season this year, and while there's been a wonderful breadth of repertoire at the company, there's never been Wagner. And both John and I felt, and the community felt, certainly through their support, that this company has grown tremendously in the musical forces that are now available to us with our wonderful Madison Opera Chorus, which you heard in the first act and will continue to hear, and the growth of Madison Symphony. It's just we've come to the point where we can perform Wagner in a really proficient way, and we have the ability to engage wonderful guest artists like you've heard in the first act and more to come in the second act, that we're very proud of what we can offer in staging a Wagner opera.
Well, and you mentioned staging of Wagner opera, not only the musical forces, but the technical demands of Wagner. Can you talk a little bit about
it's
that?
A massive production, and I suppose you could go either way. There are also minimalist productions of Wagner, so just because it's Wagner doesn't mean it has to be grand on the scenery side. This happens to be a grand set, and a very bold set visually. It's not necessarily that you're seeing two ships. I often say this opera is not about the ships, but about the relationships, and therefore we are suggesting the location of these two ships on the outer coast of Norway. But it is a very large production, not only with the principal cast members, but a 60-voice chorus. We also have supers, those extra people that are not singing in the opera, so you're not hearing them on the radio, but very significant to the full production that you would see on stage.
Now, Turid, we're going to hear you in the rest of the opera. You've been silent up until now, but this has been an important role in your career. How do you approach it?
Oh, being myself and singing good. It's Senta is a part. It's a sort of bel canto. It's Wagnerian bel canto. You have everything in it. It is her personality is she's sort of withdrawn from the rest of the group, from the rest of the the village, people in the village, and well. I don't know what to say.
Well, no, you won the Kirsten Flagstad Prize in 2000
I did.
For this role.
Yeah, for this role. I sang, I think, 7 or 8 different productions of Senta, and it's fun. It's my favorite role, absolutely.
Now, you don't just start out as a singer singing Wagner roles. You started out singing other repertoire.
Mozart, Bach, yes.
How do you know when it's time to make the switch?
I think you just have to try out. You start trying a new sort of repertoire, and your voice will tell you if it's good for you or not.
Now, John, earlier Alan mentioned the demands made on the orchestra and the musicians in this. This is really Wagner's sort of first mature opera, sort of what we think of as the mature Wagner style. What particular demands does it make on the orchestra?
Well, you have a big brass section, and they play constantly. And so there is always a question of endurance in a Wagner opera, because if you think, for example, a Puccini opera, if you think of the trumpet parts, they're always muted, playing very low, unless they're doing a fanfare like the opening of Act 2 of Bohème, where they have, that moment. But they're used very, very sparingly. In Wagner, the French horns, of course, the famous Wagner tuba, the trombones, the trumpets, they're used constantly. And also in the string writing, you have a myriad of notes, and the strings are playing sometimes in such long spans before they put that bow arm down that it's very, very fatiguing. So, but I mean, we have great string section with the Madison Symphony, and so they're really looking forward to this. I mean, and they've gotten their music early so that they can look at all the notes, and practice. And so tonight we should be really enjoying the results of an excellent musical force playing this opera. I fully have enjoyed this experience, and the musicians really are game for it.
Well, and when you're doing something as a group for the first time, there's a lot of energy in that. Too, something probably worth mentioning for people listening, particularly on the radio, is something that Wagner is very much known for, the leitmotif.
Yes, absolutely.
The little sort of musical stamps that we hear, and this is one of the operas where really he's developed that.
Oh yes, and it's very apparent to the ear, and by the time you leave the performance, these leitmotifs, you should be humming them, out the door. But I think that's the connection that Wagner has to Beethoven. The big influence on Wagner was Beethoven. And we know that Beethoven took these little leitmotifs and fashioned entire movements of symphonies out of them. And the difference with Wagner is he takes several leitmotifs and associates them either with character or situation.
We get the storm in this one, don't we? The ocean, the sort of...
Yes, oh yeah, you have the surging ocean, you have ba-bum, bum, ba-bum, ba-bum, which is the famous Dutchman theme, and then you have dee-da-da-da, da-dee-da-da, which is you're going to hear a lot now, which is associated with the redemption theme, and Zenta, of course, is associated with redemption. So those are the two that juxtapose themselves, the redemption theme and the Dutchman's theme, and then the undercurrent, of course, is both the yearning and the waves of the ocean, the water, which plays such a big part in it. But these leitmotifs are incredible, and they're present and transformative, literally in almost every measure of music in the entire opera.
Now, Alan, we've got Turid Karlson, our Senta, here with us today, but you've assembled a pretty heavy-hitting cast for this opera. Would you like to tell us a little bit about
Sure.
what we're hearing?
The audience has already heard, as you said, Bradley Garvin and Dean Peterson. Both are regulars at the Metropolitan Opera, as well as Chicago Lyric. You've also heard Greg Schmidt, who happens to live in Madison, but actually is also a Metropolitan Opera artist. And, of course, Turid, who was last heard in Madison Opera in 2004, starring as Turandot in a production that opened up the Great Overture Center. And then later in the show, actually in the same act, in Act 2, you'll hear the role of Maria Mary, sung by Julia Faulkner, who's now become a very familiar voice at Madison Opera. These are all world-class artists that we're very fortunate to have in this production.